In my restless dreams, I see that town. Silent Hill. You promised you'd take me there again someday, but you never did. Well, I'm alone there now, in our special place, waiting for you. Waiting for you to come to see me. But you never do.
Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers. Let's sit around the campfire together and talk about Dead by Daylight. Specifically, the Silent Hill chapter. Whether they did the legendary horror franchise and its characters justice, and its implications for Dead by Daylight's expanded story. Silent Hill is, at time of writing, the most recent licensed chapter for Dead by Daylight. In collaboration with the rights holders, the Japanese entertainment monolith Konami, Behaviour brought us a chapter dedicated to the illustrious survival horror franchise in June of this year. It added Midwich Elementary School, featured in the original Silent Hill, to DBD's map pool, as well as Silent Hill 3's protagonist Cheryl Mason to the survivor team. But without a doubt, the most anticipated part of the chapter was the new killer, the Silent Hill 2 boss and overall franchise icon, the Executioner, commonly known as Pyramid Head. At first glance, one might mistake Pyramid Head for nothing more than a beefcake with a big knife and a unique taste in headgear. Not exactly unexplored territory for Dead by Daylight's cast of killers, I'll be honest. But anyone familiar with Silent Hill knows that its monsters are very rarely human. At least, not in the biological sense. The humanity in Pyramid Head, and the other manifestations within Silent Hill, such as the nurses, the mannequins, and the lying figures, is not found in their biology, but in their symbolism. Talking about the lore of Pyramid Head, in the same way I've talked about Amanda Young or the Plague before, isn't something that I can really do, because Amanda and Adiris are people with life stories and personalities that can be analysed as the actions of people with their own thoughts and feelings. We can't understand Pyramid Head's actions in that way, because Pyramid Head isn't a person, and before I go any further, we're going to be getting into spoiler territory. This video will contain spoilers for the first 3 Silent Hill games, so if you're unfortunate enough to have not played those games yet, I would advise caution. If you're not bothered by spoilers, then more power to you, but if you are, then maybe give this video a miss. But for the love of God, play or at least watch a Let's Play of the first 3 Silent Hill games. They are absolute masterpieces, with 3 being one of my favourite games of all time, and 2 having arguably the best story of any horror game of all time. So, without further ado, let's talk about who, or more accurately, what Pyramid Head is in the context of Silent Hill. The town of Silent Hill works by reflecting the psyche of its inhabitants back at them, like a metaphysical funhouse mirror, that twists your personality, thoughts and flaws into the monsters that prowl its streets. Pyramid Head is one of those dark reflections. Specifically, he reflects a key aspect of James Sunderland, Silent Hill 2's protagonist. The whole story of Silent Hill 2 is about James coming to terms with his guilt after he murdered his terminally ill wife Mary. And Pyramid Head is a manifestation of that guilt. The great knife he wields is a symbol of the domestic life that he and Mary could never have, and his masculine physique represents James's own toxic masculinity, since he killed Mary due to built-up sexual frustration and resentment he was harbouring towards her during her sickness. As a result, Pyramid Head really isn't a person. Outside of James's encounters with him, he doesn't truly exist. He's effectively a figment of James's subconscious imagination, brought to life to punish him, until he understands and comes to terms with what he's done. And once James manages that, and the executioner has served his purpose, he kills himself at the end. when there's no punishment left to mete out, no lesson to learn, there is no need for the executioner of Silent Hill anymore.
And so I wait, wrapped in my cocoon of pain and loneliness. I know I've done a terrible thing to you, something you'll never forgive me for. I wish I could change that, but I can't. I feel so pathetic and ugly laying here, waiting for you. Every day I stare up at the cracks in the ceiling, and all I can think about is how unfair it all is.
Which brings me to his reason to exist in Dead by Daylight. With James Sunderland being snubbed by the entity as Silent Hill's survivor of choice in favour of the Silent Hill 3 protagonist Cheryl Mason, it begs the question, why is Pyramid Head here at all? Why not a monster more personal to Cheryl as a reflection of her psyche, such as Valtiel or the Missionary? Other than Pyramid Head being easily the most marketable character in the history of Silent Hill, that is. To Behaviour's credit, they've actually put some effort into trying to answer this question. At the start of Silent Hill 3's third act, Harry Mason, the protagonist of the original Silent Hill and Cheryl's devoted father, is killed by the Missionary, an agent of the Order that worships the malevolent abomination fueling the madness of Silent Hill. This dramatically changes the tone of the remainder of Silent Hill 3, as Cheryl, using the name Heather to hide from the Order, not only fights to end the Order's manhunt for her, but also to avenge Harry's murder. Even though she destroys the Order by killing their god and dismantling their power structure, she is clearly still emotionally wrecked by what happened to him, and Dead by Daylight expands on those feelings of loss and abandonment. As many survivors of great trauma do, Cheryl blames herself for what happened to her father. Her job, working at a crisis intervention centre for troubled youth, is completely in character, for someone who sees unnecessary suffering, such as the death of Vincent in Silent Hill 3, as a tragedy. But it's also suggested that part of the reason she does it is to give back to the world and to assuage her lingering survivor's guilt. This is also why I strongly believe Cheryl to have been the best survivor Behaviour and Konami could have picked out of all the various Silent Hill protagonists. Because she's a deeply complex character who is, in many ways, still growing into the person she wants to be, and is still trying to find her place in the world. James and Harry and every other protagonist in Silent Hill has very much concluded their story. But Cheryl's story has only just begun, and that makes her a very interesting and rootable character to see in action in Dead by Daylight. Her survivor's guilt is just one very small part of her personality that Behaviour has played up in their lore biography for her, and it kind of justifies Pyramid Head's appearance. As a symbol of guilt and the subconscious desire for penance, Pyramid Head Reborn, as a manifestation of Cheryl's survivor's guilt, actually makes some amount of sense, at least. That's the explanation that Behaviour seems to be going with. But do I agree with that explanation? In short, no. No, I don't.
The doctor came today. He told me I could go home for a short stay. It's not that I'm getting better. It's just that this may be my last chance. I think you know what I mean. Even so, I'm glad to be coming home. I've missed you terribly. But I'm afraid, James. I'm afraid you don't really want me to come home. Whenever you come see me, I can tell how hard it is on you. I don't know if you hate me or pity me, or maybe I just disgust you. I'm sorry about that.
Silent Hill is a very cerebral series, full of complex characters.
This town is full of monsters. How can you sit there and eat pizza?
Deep symbolic storytelling.
Happy birthday, dear. Oh, I forgot your name.
Who are you?
Oh, okay, thanks. Happy birthday, dear. Who are you?
Lots of ambiguities intentionally left up to interpretation.
お前の仕業だとなか。
So if you think that Cheryl's survivor's guilt after Silent Hill 3 is an acceptable explanation for Pyramid Head's appearance alongside her in Dead by Daylight, then more power to you. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. But what I am going to say is, I don't think it's good enough. Because, yes, while it makes sense for Cheryl to have a reflection of her survivor's guilt after the events of Silent Hill 3, there's no reason at all for that reflection to look like Pyramid Head. Pyramid Head's most striking visual similarity is to this image from the Silent Hill Historical Society in Silent Hill 2, called Crimson and White Banquet for the Gods. It depicts the executioners of Silent Hill back in the olden days, when almost everybody in the town either was an executioner or was related to one. This explains Pyramid Head's epithet of the executioner, as he is a twisted mirror image of these executioners' robes to match his role as a twisted harbinger of punishment and penance. James appears to have internalized the image of the executioner as a symbol of punishment from this image that he and Mary saw during their visit to the Silent Hill Historical Society. But Cheryl never visited the society and never saw that picture. If she never saw the picture, why does Pyramid Head maintain the form of the executioner when she has no reason to even know about the executioner or what it represents? If anything, it would make sense for Cheryl's symbol of guilt and punishment to look like the missionary who killed her father Harry instead, but the two look nothing alike. Behaviours attempted to explain away Pyramid Head's appearance in DBD doesn't stick for me. Instead, I have an alternative explanation, one that might annoy a few Silent Hill fans out there. Masahiro Ito was the lead creature designer for the first 4 Silent Hill games, and is considered by much of the fanbase to be the father of Pyramid Head. He's always been very attached to his work and continues to update and discuss with his fans even today. And he's always maintained a fairly puritanical view of Pyramid Head, much of the fanbase has completely accepted. To him, Pyramid Head is completely unique to James and his psyche. There is no way that Pyramid Head could manifest again from the mind of somebody else, because, in his words, would other people kill his wife too? To that I answer, metaphorically speaking, yes. People do horrific things to the ones they love, and very often live to regret it. Theoretically, anyone who has done something horrible to someone else, maybe someone they depend on or who depends on them, could have their guilt from that action reflected back at them in Silent Hill. Anyone who has hurt someone they love because they were tired, because they were frustrated, or depressed, or convinced that the one you loved had become a burden to you, has a little bit of James Sunderland in them. And in every James Sunderland lives an executioner ready to punish him for what he's done. Of course, that doesn't mean that the executioner would always look like Pyramid Head, but James isn't the only one who saw that picture. Anyone who saw the image of the executioners of Silent Hill in their robes and hoods could have internalized that image of punishment. Pyramid Head could live in the mind of anyone who had seen the executioners. But this begs the question, if Pyramid Head in Dead by Daylight isn't a reflection of Cheryl's guilt, who else could he be here to punish? Who or what could have caused so much pain to warrant the arrival of an executioner? The answer is surprisingly simple.
When I first learned that I was going to die, I just didn't want to accept it. I was so angry all the time, and I struck out at everyone I loved most. Especially you, James. That's why I understand if you do hate me. But I want you to know this, James. I'll always love you. Even though our life together had to end like this, I still wouldn't trade it for the world. We had some wonderful years together.
The entity is a being of emotion and consciousness made manifest, much like Silent Hill. It needs a constant feast of extreme emotion to sustain itself, and the survivors are its food source. With every sacrifice, every trial, the entity strengthens itself by feeding on their emotions like a vampire. And that conscious energy becomes the auric particles that build the realms. As a result, one might see the entity as a dark reflection of humanity's deepest emotions, much like how Silent Hill reflects the psychological landscapes of its visitors into a literal landscape. The entity does not fully understand what it means to be human. It can take on human images and ideas, but it is fundamentally inhuman. And despite being made of and feeding off emotion, it can't really process these emotions into feelings like you and me can. It processes the image of Midwich Elementary School, but doesn't understand what a school is or what it means. So its imitation is hollow and not fully thought through. So, the entity is a parasite, violently serving its own interest by destroying the lives of anyone in its way without considering the emotional cost of what it's doing. It's a swirling vortex of extreme emotional turmoil that cannot process the implications and meaning of its monstrous actions. Actions that brought it to Silent Hill. When it was there, it took to the grisly images and ideas it saw without fully understanding them and internalized aspects of the town and its history. That sounds an awful lot like someone we know, doesn't it? James Sunderland wasn't fully able to understand and deal with the emotional baggage that came with his brutal and violent acts. So the executioner that Silent Hill had shown him back at the society haunted him until he came to terms with what he'd done. The entity too cannot understand the moral implications of what it's doing, and yet is literally a hurricane of human emotions given form. It cannot process the overwhelming guilt that its actions would naturally elicit. The entity looked at Silent Hill, and decided to take its image unto itself, much like James did. And part of Silent Hill's image is the executioner. Maybe it took the image from Crimson and White Banquet for the Gods like James did. Maybe it took it from the Misty Day Remains of Judgment painting that James found. But when it replicated Silent Hill in the realms of the entity, a whirlpool of unresolved emotional turmoil and a subconscious need for punishment manifested the executioner of Silent Hill, Pyramid Head, with it. But Pyramid Head, despite being a killer in the trials, is no servant of the entity. To the entity, the trials are a feast, where survivors are placed on sacrificial hooks as an act of devotion, so that their emotions can be properly consumed. Pyramid Head is one of the 3 killers capable of totally bypassing the hook system and denying the entity the sacrifice it so desperately craves. He even uses his great knife to gouge deep trenches and seeping wounds in the entity's worlds, held together as they are by emotion manifested in auric cells, through which the power of Silent Hill can bleed through into the trials. In many ways, the executioner is punishing the entity in the only way it can, ripping holes in its realms and starving it of the sacrifices it demands. When James had come to his senses and finally understood the punishment of the executioner and why he was doing it, Pyramid Head killed himself because his purpose had been fulfilled. Until then, he could not be stopped, he could not be killed, he could not be contained, threatened, or bargained with. And if James hadn't retaken his humanity and accepted what he'd done, then Pyramid Head would still likely be tormenting him to this day. The entity, however, has no humanity to retake, and likely will never understand the atrocities it has committed as anything other than an act of survival. So I suspect its twisted, self-inflicted punishment will never end. As long as there is cruelty, there is sin. As long as there is sin, there is guilt. As long as there is guilt, there is the executioner.
Well, this letter has gone on too long, so I'll say goodbye. I told the nurse to give this to you after I'm gone. That means that as you read this, I'm already dead. I can't tell you to remember me, but I can't bear for you to forget me. These last few years since I became ill, I am so sorry for what I did to you, did to us. You've given me so much, and I haven't been able to return a single thing. That's why I want you to live for yourself now. Do what's best for you, James. James, you made me happy.